We looked at the where the Industrial Revolution started, some of the reasons it started there, where it spread. We looked at the Agricultural Revolution and some of the inventions and consequences of that. We looked at the Industrial Revolution, more some of the inventions in the textile industry, then afterwards, electrical innovation, steam engine, and the consequences of that. So, finally, we're going to look at the factors that enhanced or impeded the spread of the Industrial Revolution into Eastern Europe and the Far East. So basically, why did the Industrial Revolution spread unevenly? So if you look at this, the year 1800, the year 1900, what do you notice? Look at the year 1800, these largest cities in the world. Most of them are concentrated in Asia, right? Here we have Asia, Europe, Asia, 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 Europe, Europe, Asia, Asia, Asia. So 7 out of the 10 are in Asia. By the year 1900, you were down to only 1 in Asia, right? You have Europe, US, Europe, Europe, US, Europe, Asia, Europe, Europe, US. So there's something big that has happened in there, right? What has happened, what has changed so drastically is the Industrial Revolution. But here's a thought. Since Europe was so quick to industrialize, why not Russia? Russia's part of Europe. What was going on in Russia? One reason, there's lots of different reasons you can come up with. One of the main reasons, though, is they have this really old system with a few very rich people at the top and a bunch of very poor, mostly farmers, very much like it used to be in the medieval times. Not a lot had changed, right? There's not a lot of will to industrialize. And people are doing okay, especially those at the top, and those who aren't doing so well don't have the money or the power to industrialize, so it kind of just stays the same for a while. This is what we call the Kremlin here. This was the Imperial Palace. It used to be white. When it was the Imperial Palace where the emperor lived, then it was painted red under the communists, which we'll talk about later. But so the rulers of Russia are called the czars, like this guy. He's at the very top. He's in charge of Russia, the Russian Empire. So the Russian elite were resistant to change, so much so that this serfdom, which had been abolished in most of Europe since the Middle Ages, since the medieval times, took until 1861 in Russia. These landlords basically owned the people who worked on their land up until that point, right? Like they couldn't get married or even leave the town sometimes without permission from the landlord. That's how much control they had. That system wasn't abolished until 1861, right? Tsar Alexander technically is the one who abolished it. He gets the credit there. So they're stuck in this old system, industrializing, but very slowly. If you look at this chart, these are economies of the world throughout history and the different shares of the world economy. You look at the top, the red and the orange. These are around the year 1700. The largest two in the world by far are China and India. They also have a very large percentage of the world's population, but are also some of the most advanced and greatest powers in the world. So China has this, thousands of years of history of being probably the most powerful country in the world, the largest army, inventions and creations coming out of there all the time, this huge amount of land they rule over, and just these big, powerful empires throughout history. So why weren't they able to industrialize as quickly as Europe? Why didn't they come up with industrialization? Well, part of it's probably just luck, right? And part of it, some scholars, some historians theorize that it has to do with the way their belief system, their society is set up. They're in China at the time very much based on these ideas of Confucianism and legalism and Taoism and Buddhism. All of these things are very much focused on China as a whole, not on the individual. They call this collectivism, right? The needs and what's good for all of China is more important than what's good for just you, the individual, which you could argue is different than what was going on in Europe and especially the United States, right? There's this idea of kind of a rugged individualism in the United States, like you go out and make your fortune and you go do it, whatever gets in your way, you can overcome it. Kind of different than what's going on in China. It's more about what's good for China more than what's good for you. So that's one theory. Also, there is a lack of resources available to others, like in Britain, who has coal, and they have a big empire with all these other resources, like wood from the New World or precious metals from Africa, things like that. So lack of resources. Even though China is a very large empire, it doesn't have some of the same resources, and it doesn't really have overseas territories. And one final thing that's been suggested is that because they've been so powerful for so long, because they've been so dominant in their region for thousands of years, why would they change, right? Why would they try to adopt these European ideas about industrialization when what they've been doing has kept them in power for so long? That's right, that tradition, that status quo. Why would you change it? So China is a very powerful, big economy, doesn't really embrace industrialization quickly. India is the other one. Now, what's going on in India? Now, it's different than China because they actually had started going through kind of an early stage of industrialization. They become the largest manufacturer of goods in the world by the 1700s, so they're putting out lots of products. These goods are traded all over the world. In fact, the very first cotton gin was invented in India. Right? Eli Whitney, we gave him the credit, but actually the first one was invented in India. It's a little different, but it has the same principle. So India is this huge textile industry. Like Britain develops and comes to dominate, but India is doing really well by the early 1700s. But then the Mughal Empire collapses, which is this big, powerful empire, this kingdom that controls most or a large part of India. It slowly collapses over years and years, but they lose control of a lot of territory. That makes it less safe, and then the economy starts to fall and collapse because it's not as safe, it's not as orderly, and just the trade doesn't go as well, and the manufacturing slows down. And then later, the British start to colonize and begin getting as much resources and as much labor out of India as they can, and India isn't focused as much on its manufacturing as it used to be. So there's lots of different reasons why India starts to industrialize, but then it slows down and doesn't industrialize until later. And here we see Britain begins to take over India to the 18th and 19th century, which we'll talk about more later. Finally, trade secrets. So a big reason that the industrialization didn't spread as easily is because the British, the Europeans, and the Americans tried to make sure that it did not spread. Right? Their inventions, their innovations gave them a strong advantage, right, over other countries, other empires. Things, especially their military advantage, like the Maxim machine gun, right? People all over the world had guns, right? Britain went to build an empire in Africa, and they had been trading guns with Africa for hundreds of years. So African countries had plenty of guns, but most of them did not have weapons like the machine gun. So that was a big advantage when Europeans go into Africa to try and take control, which they do somewhat successfully. And some of these secrets, like these military secrets, could be so protected that if you were caught sharing technology or even showing someone how to use it who wasn't British, you could be put in jail or possibly even killed for treason. So they were very, very strict on keeping these secrets. And that helps slow the spread of the Industrial Revolution.